say welcome. We want to thank everybody for being with us.
I can't hear you, Elizabeth.
Oh.
I can hear her.
Maybe it's, can
you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I hear you fine.
I was thinking, man.
Sorry, that's me. My bad.
Welcome to
I
technology.
turned down my volume. I was kind of, and forgot that.
Not a
you as
problem.
well.
We want to say welcome. I know we've got several people that are going to be joining us here in a few minutes. And again, on behalf of the Kentucky Association of Realtors, a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, we are so excited to have you all here again. We had a great turnout with our first session of this book called Caste. And it was an in-person book club meeting at our summer meeting in French Lick. It was fantastic. We had great conversation. And before I pass over the baton to Jen, who is leading us on the discussion of this book, I want to first of all thank our subcommittee co-chair or chair, Lester Sanders. Lester, we appreciate all the hard work that you have done and keeping us on task with the book club. Also, I would like to thank Suzanne. She helps us with our committee, and the KYR staff has been fantastic. So again, thank you, Lester. Thank you, Suzanne, for all that you're doing for our committee. And again, welcome. And Jen, I'm going to turn it right over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for being here. I'm joining you from a sunny car, out and about in between appointments and hanging out with family today. So I'm really happy that we have the turnout that we have. I was thrilled that we had the turnout that we did in French Lick. Thank you, everyone, so much for your participation in that. And I'm excited to continue the conversation today. So with that, we'll get started. And I think probably what I'd like to do is focus on parts 4 and parts 5 a little bit, which are the tentacles of caste, the consequences of caste, and then talk about kind of where do we go from here. So we've read this, we've gained some insight into what this means, but what can we do? Is there anything as a group, bringing that part of the discussion into where do we go from here? And I think that's important in part of any learning process, any book, any new information that you're gathering. It's great to have the information, but now what do we do with it? So I'd love to end on that note with you as a group and kind of go from there. So as I was going through this, and this was written in 2020, it was written during the pandemic. I did a lot of reading, but then I went back and tried to do a little bit more research, just understanding. I looked up Isabel Wilkerson and some different media appearances that she had done. And there was one that was really interesting. It was on New Year's Day in 2017. So it was right after the presidential election of 2016, before the inauguration. And it was Isabel Wilkerson and 3 other authors, and one of which was J.D. Vance, who wrote Hillbilly Elegy. But it was kind of talking about authors writing about their experience in the U.S. and kind of, again, that kind of conversation of it's 2017. We've had this event in 2016. Where do we go from here? How do we kind of build, a step forward, a path forward? And it was interesting in that media circumstance, she quoted aspects of this book. So I think this was already percolating for her. She mentioned caste as an aspect of being African-American in the United States. And she actually literally quoted, "The heart is the final frontier," in part of that interview as well, which is kind of the last chapter of the book before we get into the epilogue. So I just found it interesting that clearly this was information that was already percolating for her. And I'm not sure how far we've come, frankly, from New Year's Day, January 17th to now. I would say some maybe would say we've taken a step back, but hopefully we can get to a point where we're moving forward. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of preface with that I found it interesting that she's had already, again, there was a lot of this material kind of in her mind and in her speaking work at that point already. I think going into that, if we look at the tentacles of caste, I think kind of as you read through that chapter, it talks a lot about kind of the lowest rung of the highest caste, which would, in the United States, that would be portrayed as poor or working class white Americans, feeling very threatened and feeling like they are being replaced, their way of life is being replaced and potentially removed or stolen by members of a lower caste trying to move up into society. So I wanted to get some thoughts and feedback from folks as it relates to that aspect of how again, kind of that lower rung of the dominant caste, what's happening there that is potentially driving a lot of the unrest and division and animosity, I guess is a good word potentially to use there, as it relates to not being open or open to the idea of folks from the perceived lower class moving up. So with that, I don't know, does anyone have any thoughts or comments as it relates to that?
So would that be like the lower upper class? I mean, I remember in college, I'd always just heard of upper class, middle class, lower class, but then I had a class that I was in a class that said, that brought up the notion or theory or whatever of upper middle, upper lower, and then all the way down to, I remember thinking, wonder where I am, and then, and I think that's just human nature, to kind of try to figure out where you are or where you're perceived to be. And I think that's the human condition. I mean, I don't, that's hard to get around, I think, if I'm honest. I think everybody kind of thinks of themselves as middle class. And I remember growing up, I mean, we had, there was a family at church, he was a doctor, and they were the rich family. We always knew that they had a lot of money. And then like on our street, there was Dr. Coomer, he lived in the big house and his kids were my friends. But I knew that we weren't where they were, even though we lived 4 doors down. And that was at a young age, 7, 8 years old. And I don't know why. It's just funny how we think like that. And I don't know if that's going towards what we're talking about, but just in reading this book, I just think of myself and growing up and how it's easy to feel inferior in any group, whether it's athletics or academia. If you're a smart kid or the Al Blevins, captain of the basketball team, if you're not that person, if you're more average, you feel that, and I think, talk about a caste system, kids can be cruel, and that starts at a young age.
Does. And I do think it's human nature to want to categorize and kind of, like you said, figure out where you fit in the hierarchy of things. I think, on an individual and personal level, it's easy to do that and feel that, but then we have the societal kind of structure that has reinforced that on a group-wide basis, created, I don't know what the right word is there, but then—
Well, that one chapter talked about group narcissism or something, and I started thinking, they talked about Hitler and Heil Hitler and all that people, they knew what was happening was bad, but they were just glad they weren't on the other end of the stick. So they kind of went along with it. And I just started thinking about as kids, you want to be one of the cool kids, or you don't want to be one of the outcasts. And that's hard, especially if you're kind of in that group. So you find yourself being mean to people just to fit in or not to be on the other end of the stick. And that's hard.
Simone, I agree with that. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No. I was going to say, and Jen, I don't know if this answers the question or is completely on topic. But my takeaway from it, or what I hope that we could, actually make some action on, is I feel it's the way we do that. Like Lamont was saying, we are in different groups and different categories, and we're measuring ourselves against each other. What I think is sad is the way that the system has actually forced us even to fight over who needs the most help, who should get assistance, who, like, we're reading it, and we can get in a debate about, who is discriminated against worse, so if there's one, if something is, if we're making this concerted effort to right, say some wrongs that were done to African Americans, then, other people, like we were talking about the caste systems, other people may feel, oh, well, what about us? Or vice versa, there's some special treatment, or, there's reparations and things that have been paid towards Holocaust victims and Nazis. And then other people, not Nazis, but, the Holocaust victims. And it's like, well, what about us? And so we keep working on this, like, we can't help everyone. Like, all of the injustices should be addressed. And by addressing one over another at any specific time, I think that we can do both. We can walk and chew gum at the same time, but we sometimes, but it's set up in the system that they're making the people that have either been wronged or that need the most assistance, like, fight with each other. We're fighting for what's left over, while the higher caste is moving on and moving up, right? So if there's ways that we can create alliances, that's where I was going with my long-winded response on what could we do. I believe we need more alliances. I believe we need more understanding that if some of our brothers and sisters right now are going through something more specific or imminent, then all of us can jump on and support. And that doesn't mean that we can't turn around and support other causes later, but we fight, we battle over the attention.
We definitely do. And I think it becomes, that notion of there's a pie. There's a finite amount of resources. There's a finite amount of energy that we have, and somehow devoting resources or devoting energy to one group over another is reducing something that someone else might get down the road, or someone else might get right now, versus the theory of, a rising tide lifts all boats. It's not, there isn't, how do you balance that? Because I do think that there is a huge group of society that, again, it's that notion, if you give something to someone else, you're taking it from me, you're disadvantaging me, without looking to the past to say, but how long have we been doing that to other people? How long has that truly been going on, either in a way that's acknowledged or not? And maybe we need to fix that, and it doesn't mean I'm trying to take something away from you. I'm trying to diminish your place in the world. It's let's bring these people into the fold that we've excluded, on purpose. And that's where I think a lot of that disconnect happens. It's that fear of what's going to be taken away from me because we're adding somebody else into the fold. Which is, I think that's part of the tentacles, that's part of the consequences. I guess that's the overall kind of where we get with that. It was interesting, Lamont, you were talking about kind of, categorizing ourselves as part of the human condition. Another media appearance that I happened to watch was one with Trevor Noah interviewing Isabel Wilkerson, talking about caste. And he was referencing South Africa and the fact that, there still is strife, there still is struggle in South Africa, even though the power structure has shifted by race, in large part. That didn't solve the problem. And he acknowledged that. He's like, we thought skin color was the problem. We thought that if the power structure were shifted based upon skin color, based upon the majority of the nation, that everything would be fine. And what they found is there's still there's still that infrastructure of caste underlying holding everything up. So it goes back to that kind of the way she describes it's an old house, you know, the foundation and the structure holding up that house is the caste system, and race is more of the cosmetics and different things that you can see. So he's like, you know, we didn't fix as much as we thought we were fixing by shifting the power structure. So I thought that was an interesting insight, which it feels kind of sad and defeatist. Was like, how do we fix it? You know, where do we go from here at this point? So I don't know. I don't know that I have any super specific answers. Does anyone have any? What other thoughts or insight? Is there anything that stood out to you as you were reading these last few chapters of the book?
Jen, can I hop in for a second on recovery? One is, you know, if you sometimes you sing a song, you'll hear the song, and you take a certain amount from what you heard, and then you play it again, and you hear something totally different. It sends a different message, additional things that you didn't discover. And that's what's powerful about this book. Things that you've lived or seen in life, it like starts explaining it in a way that, and connecting the dots that many times we knew what was happening or what is happening, but we didn't grasp how it was set up. And then you kind of moved into class versus caste is what we're talking about. And one of the things that society does, and we had this discussion, and I mentioned this in a discussion not too long ago, society does something to us, particularly here in America. It has its way of us fighting, typically the one on the, like you spoke about, on the lower rung, as the caste system exists, and those on the highest rung of the lower rung. They pit themselves, society pits us against one another because of the fear of somebody who's right here, barely on the bottom, almost exactly like the person trying to come up. The difference in the caste system, as they talk about, is caste, it doesn't matter. You're not gonna come up. You're not coming out of lower class to middle class, not in a caste system. It's going to do everything it can because it's designed to keep you in that place. And so that's what I thought was really revealing. In the caste versus the class. And so I know Lamont was talking about the caste and the class and how those things go, but like I said, the more I read it and study it or listen to it, it just continues to reveal more and more. And that's what's not just shocking, and it's stunning that's a system that's there in place. That's like they say, you can't see the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, we're walking around in it, and that's what it is. And so,
that reminds me of this weekend. We were with some people, and a song came on, and one of the friends was kind of humming it, and then one of our other friends just starts saying the lyrics word by word from memory. And he said, "What are you saying?" She said, "Dude, I'm singing the song." He goes, "Oh, I don't know the words. I just like the lyrics." And it kind of reminded me of that. You know, a lot of times we don't really know. You know, I mean, think of My Old Kentucky Home, you know, or something like that. I mean, we don't, half the time we don't even know the lyrics or what they mean or what they ever meant. You know, we're just singing along, humming along, kind of like in a class system. You know, we're just kind of doing our thing, you know, just going along, going with the flow, but we really don't know what we don't know sometimes. Is on mute?
No, you're good. I think that's right. I think that's an interesting.
Or was it just so deep that it was just so moving and deep that it just everyone just had to go,
We had to absorb that for a second, right?
That's pretty good.
It's interesting, as you start to, I've caught myself hearing things differently watching television or watching a movie or reading a book, and kind of the dismissive way that someone talks about, I was, having a Black friend, or the way I'm trying to even think of a good example. I was listening to a podcast, and a gentleman was talking about his sister who had ultimately died by suicide, but he was kind of describing
LLS.
He was describing her mental illness and kind of triggers that as a family maybe they had overlooked or chosen not to acknowledge as she was struggling for several years before she wound up taking her own life. And one of the things that he said was she brought a Black man to her sister's wedding, and that stopped my heart for a second, and it just, I literally gasped out loud, because I suppose in the 80s and in the wealthy white caste that and circumstance that they were in, maybe that was a shocking thing, but to just hear it after kind of focusing on kind of the underpinnings of how this perception comes about, just the casual way that he tossed that out as an example of some of the crazy things that his sister had done, it really took me aback, and it was shocking to consider it that way. So I feel like that is a little bit off topic too, but I think you do start to pick up on just, again, that casual circumstance of racism that I don't even think people realize it's that unconscious bias that's there, that unless you're aware of it, you're not aware of it. And I'm sad, because I know there's a whole lot of people who have spent a lifetime being aware of it.
So Jen, I'll tell on myself, and I hope this, so at our wedding in 1987, my best man, Sean Perkins, Black guy, my wife's grandfather, who'd be like 100 now, we found out later, when he saw that, he said something to the effect of, "Good Lord, he's got a Black man as his best man." He goes, "The Kennedys didn't even do that." I mean, that's.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. In 1987, and I'd never even crossed my mind that anyone would ever think that or say. I mean, it's just, but there it is. I mean, just. So anyway, it reminds me of your story.
Guys, I'm going to have to step out for a minute. I'm going to try to log back in, but I have a little bit of an emergency, so I'm going to have to take care of that.
Good luck. Thank you for joining us. So where do we go from here? What are some of our options as far as, I think awareness is probably the first step. And again, I'm embarrassed to admit that this has been a lack of awareness on my part for a lot of the ideas and notions that were presented in the book. I think in the end, where she gets to the point about, kind of the heart being the last frontier and connecting one-on-one on a personal level with folks. And she described the circumstance where a plumber had come to her house, and it was clearly an uncomfortable circumstance, uncomfortable situation. She was feeling that he wasn't being helpful. He wasn't, he was what she was describing as someone who would be wearing a Trump hat probably in a different circumstance. And they clearly were not on the same page, and she was feeling like he was not interested in helping her in the least. They wound up just kind of by happenstance connecting over the fact that she said that her mother had just passed away the week before. And they got to talking about parents, and they found a mutual connection. They found a thread to connect over, and it changed the dynamic of their relationship and working together, and ultimately he solved the problem. But having those one-on-one opportunities, and I think we're pretty good at that as people, but I don't know that we always put ourselves in that circumstance to have those one-on-one connections with folks, from a different culture, ethnicity, race, caste. We compartmentalize ourselves, definitely. I think we self-select in a lot of ways, and then other ways it's not that way. But what do we do? What's a good next step that to work hard to be advocates for things to change?
I'll let somebody else go first.
I was just going to say,
Go ahead,
just
Mark.
listening to that, being in the office and having some good friends here, Carter and I have had some really good conversations, and they've been spirited at times, I would say, but it's been really good. It's opened my eyes up to some things, and I think I've opened his eyes up to some things, and just having these conversations with each other, even when you don't totally agree, which Carter and I don't always agree on everything, but we could still talk. We're still friends. I still consider him a friend, even when we don't agree. Just having those one-on-one conversations, like you said, I think it's huge. This book has been really eye-opening for me, because I mean, all of the references toward Nazi and Hitler, I really felt that over the last several years. I said, I see similarities, and I think a lot of people thought I was crazy. But I was shocked to find out in this book, because I'm a little bit behind, not a very good reader or listener, but that Nazi really took a lot of their ideology from us, that what we had in place here. That was a shock to me. I had no clue about that. But again, it's these conversations and talking to people, and not just having a Black friend or a gay friend, but having conversations with those people and trying to understand their different perspectives. I think that's the only way we're going to make progress in this world. And it's not just here. It's not just in the United States. It's everywhere.
I think that's a good point to bring up. I think we do tend to focus on, obviously, we're in the United States, so it makes sense that we're focusing on that. But the notion that, our system of racism through slavery and that legacy that we hold puts us in, a position where we truly are kind of the moral dregs of society when it comes to that. And it's sad to know that, I mean, there's racism everywhere. There's, it definitely is not just here. And again, I think we talked about this. I love the United States. I love this country. I think there's amazing opportunity here, but I also think it's important that we acknowledge we've had policy decisions. We've had, a lot of things in place over time that have truly limited people's path to it hasn't closed it for good, but boy, my goodness, we put a lot of hurdles in place for people to try to hop over.
Just in the last several years, I could marry the person that I choose. That was huge for me. I mean, it's still emotional for me, because I never thought I'd see that in my lifetime. And I still remember back when there were laws against acts of homosexuality, and even here in Kentucky, it's not that long ago that those laws were taken off the books, the sodomy laws and things like that. So and one of the other things, just on a national or a world level, I had a friend, we were just talking about going to Egypt. It's a gay excursion group, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to go to Egypt with a group of gay people, that this vacation group is known for that. And so we got to reading through the cautions, don't hold hands, don't wear clothing that could be perceived as, because it is illegal there. And I'm like, I'd love to go see the pyramids, but I'm not going with a group of gays. And right now, I don't think it's safe for me to go. It's like just thinking, yeah, I guess it's an appreciation too for the United States, because we're far from perfect, that's for sure. But we are advanced over some countries in different demographics. I mean, I right now I just wouldn't go because I would fear for my safety there. So
I think that's
interesting.
It is. And I think that's an excellent perspective as well. I think the lightning speed that reform took hold as it relates to the rights of gay people and that population to marry, to be able to, you know, again, it's just, I think that from the time that I mean, it caught like wildfire when it started to turn. And I mean, you just said you didn't think that you would see the ability to marry the person that you choose in your lifetime. And
now we get to deal with divorce.
Whatever.
Thanks, guys.
I want that to happen for everybody. I want somehow to solve the problems of the world overnight. And I know we can't, but my goodness, we have an example of sea change that happens so rapidly. And I mean, I find that to be a fascinating circumstance. Once that finally took hold, how quickly it truly did change. And it gives me hope that, again, our better days are ahead of us. We always have to keep keeping the faith on that, right? That's the best we have. But what else? How, real estate wise, I guess, you know, kind of bringing it back to our profession and making sure that we're doing what we need to be doing to keep home ownership available for all. Are there things that we can be doing as professionals differently or better than what we've done?
You know, Jen, I know this has been brought up in our past discussions, and I think it was actually Lamont that brought it to our book club's attention. I mean, I think one thing as a real estate professional is if you see something, you need to say something. You know, I think so many times, you know, we as realtors see ethical issues out there, yet it does take time to be able to stop and contact the right person. But if we don't start doing that, it's just going to continue. I'm not going to say it's going to continue to get worse. It's going to be harder and harder to change. So, you know, I think a lot of us on this call, we've been in real estate for a very long time, and we all have standards. So I think if we see something and we recognize that somebody is doing something that they should not be doing, or maybe they don't know, maybe it's that implicit bias. You know, I mean, I didn't really think about all of this until I started studying it, and I'm like, wow, you know, and then I became more conscious of it. So I think, you know, if you see it, you need to say something, and just constantly being in tune with how we individually as realtors look at things, and, you know, to call our own selves out, because I do think that it's going to take time for that to occur in our industry.
Kind of piggybacking on the book and what Elizabeth was just saying, they talked about, actually, we don't look at it this way, the evil of silence. And in the book that talked about that in particular, and it addressed against Nazi Germany, and it was saying, hey, look, all the Germans were not Nazis. But the reason Nazis were able to take over is because they stayed silent oftentimes on what they saw. And there's a song, it's called Fight the Power, if anybody knows that song. And that's from Public Enemy, but it's talking about feeling like you're fighting against a nation. That's what it addresses in the overall album. It's and that's what it pays attention to. And again, seeing something, saying something, we hear that, and we didn't know what it meant during Breonna Taylor and, George Floyd. Some may not have known, but now you do. So Jen asked the question, what do we do? And you look in various and sundry places. You look in your association and say, hey, are we giving everybody the same chance to bid on different opportunities that come up in the association? If not, are we being fair to everybody? So there are things that are obvious, and if we just continue to open our eyes and look, like I said, the book makes it so that each time you read it, you pick up a little bit more. But once you hear it, it doesn't matter if, when they say love wasn't put in your heart to stay, love isn't love until you give it away. And it's that type of thing that we have to live with. Once we know what's the activities that we do, and yeah, some things take time, but what have we always been told in real estate? Now you get your training, but then what do you do with it? You've got to go out and hit the streets with it. And so that's just how this book brings it all around. And it really says it that, yeah, we have work to do, not just the group, but individually. So I'll rest with that.
Thank you for that. I love what you said, bringing that up. Love isn't love until you give it away. It's great for us to collect this knowledge. It's great for us to educate ourselves. But then putting it into practice out in the world, I think is the next and most important step of it all. When you know better, you do better, right? So hopefully. One aspect of the book we were talking about, and again, I think just kind of the divisive, the rhetoric that is happening in the world right now. And we talked a little bit about this in the first session, is kind of the ability to dehumanize one another and look at people as an other, as a them versus as another human. And one of the comments, media appearances that Isabel Wilkerson was talking about, it was, we focus very much on diversity in our DEI groups and in the conversation right now. Diversity is something that we're focusing on. And I guess ultimately the hope is, and her hope in that statement was, we get to a point where we can focus on the commonality of all of us and what we share in common versus what makes us different. And there's, I think, a lot more that makes us common versus those observable differences. Sometimes observable, sometimes not. But part of getting to that point where we can focus on the commonality is the equity and inclusion part of a DEI. We can only focus on how we're common when we're bringing everybody into the fold and we're saying, you deserve to be here, not you deserve to be excluded. So how I think, ways that we can start to welcome and encourage that inclusion. Again, we're not trying to reduce the pie for anybody else. We're just trying to grow the circle to allow everybody to be a part of it. So I think she described some of that in the book. What are there things in the book as you read that stood out to you in a way to work to observe the commonalities that we share as a group versus focusing on the differences?
So one thing I'd struggle with, just to be honest about it, is, we think about, race and sexuality and things like that. But, another part of, I don't know that we have a caste system, but we certainly have a class system that is in full force in America. And, just as sometimes I feel like I'm being not very inclusive when I struggle with homelessness and the people within, say, Louisville that just don't seem to want to get better. And that's not being judgmental. There's one guy I've been helping out for probably 6 months or so, let him do some work at the office. And he gives me his story that we went to the same high school and all this kind of stuff. But then now it's a year and a half later, and he's still every day he's at the same place. I mean, he's 33 years old and he's healthy, and I guess I find myself feeling not good about myself, because sometimes it angers me to think, why aren't these people trying to get, I know some of them have mental illness, but a lot of them do not. And, and I see our city just littered and trashed, and they're at every intersection, they're on bikes. And I try to figure out, how do I help make that better, and help them and be more understanding. But I think some people, the Bible said, the poor will always be with us. And I just sometimes I feel like some people don't want, they're comfortable in where they are in their class, whether it's lower class or poor, that's their identity. And some people just don't, and I hope it doesn't sound like a Republican Democrat thing, but I mean, it just bothers me. And I know it's a very complex issue. But anyway.
Sometimes I think what you're talking about, Lamont, people don't realize there is any difference. That's all they've been exposed to. That's their world, They don't know how we break out of that situation. A lot of times education, teachers, school systems, they can work toward helping that. But at the same time, a lot of times, like you say, they have mental illnesses, and so that may be a situation. They may be addicted, but then just general for children to move out of what they're exposed to on a day-to-day basis. A lot of times they don't know that there's anything that they can do about it. They feel like they're caught in a catch-22. One of my friends has worked in social work for probably 35 years. I mean, and the thing of it is, sometimes they tend to get, according to her, on welfare, and they're locked into it. They're drawing a check. If they get out and try to get an education, then they're running the obstacle of possibly losing that. And some of them have been in that situation. It's generational, maybe 5 generations. One time she got into this idea when she was taking a graduate class. So she did some research, and she found out in some cases, these people had been locked into public assistance for as many as 5 generations. And that wasn't looking at it on race basis. That was just looking at it in general, whether they were Caucasian, Black, or whatever. And so sometimes, they go to school with children in different classes, but still, they haven't been exposed to that on a one-to-one basis. They haven't been to that child's home that is upscale or whatever. So they are locked into that little community that they deal with on a day-to-day basis. And it's kind of sad, Yeah. So I don't know. Sometimes I think we as a society don't know the answer. But with these conversations, maybe we can try to find an answer. And that's what this is all about in my way of thinking.
Yeah.
I do appreciate that perspective, that it does feel like exposure changes your perception, and it changes your thought processes. It changes your perspective. I think one of the goals that our family has, we want to do international travel with our kids on an annual basis, just so that they're seeing something outside of the US. And yeah, we'll do some resorts and some beaches, but we want to do some travel that involves actually seeing the world too, not just pretty beaches, but to give our kids a different perspective, different cultures, different foods, different, abilities. My daughter, she has a very special, tender place in her heart for the homeless. And whenever we go downtown, I always have to make sure that I have some cash on hand, some bills or change, because she wants to give money to people that she sees. So that's kind of a big to do. And we were downtown Wednesday night or Tuesday night, I guess it was. And one of the gentlemen was holding a sign that said, "I'm not going to lie, I want beer or wine." And she read his sign. She's 10. She read his sign and she gave him $1. She had a 5. She had a 5 and a 1. She's like, "Mom, I only gave him $1 because do you think he's really going to buy beer with that $1?" And I said, "Well, he might." I said, "I don't know. I guess he was." I said he was being honest, that was maybe what he was going to do with it. And she said, "Well, he should be saving that money so he can buy a house." And so I think all these years that she's been handing out money, whenever we go downtown, I think in her heart of hearts, she truly felt like, she was building a savings account for people. So I think that was a little bit of an interesting, so she wants to have a homeless shelter when she grows up. That's her big dream in life. And so she's had conversations. She's brought it up a couple times since then on, if she has a homeless shelter, she's going to do her best to help people actually get houses instead of buy beer with the money that people give them or with the help that they receive. So it's just been an interesting shift this week that she got a different perspective on what her help might be doing in the world. So, but I love that about her. It's one of my favorite things that she's never met a homeless person that she didn't want to somehow figure out how to help them. So.
Well, I'm going to throw something else in here. When I first started teaching in the 70s, statewide teachers in Kentucky had to do census, so of school-age children. So we were assigned a territory, and in most cases we had 2 or 3 areas that we had to go into and actually visit the homes, make sure there were, if there were children, ages, name, get all the information on that child. And in doing so, as a young teacher, I was exposed to the community that my students were coming from each day. And as adults, we tend to think that children are raised the way our children or our nieces and nephews or the way we were raised. And that's not the situation. But in later years, because of safety and that type issue, Kentucky abandoned that. And so teachers nowadays, they just know the community that they live in. They don't know what their students are coming from. And when I was supervisor, I encouraged our teachers to get children out and take them on visits to different locations, field trips where they would do culminating events. That would be a field trip that would take these children out of the community they were in. And teachers learned, which they, I did the K-TIP program, which was a Kentucky Intern Teacher Program. And it was a shock when they actually saw that these students didn't have the experiences that they had or their children had, and that they were different. So that was a learning experience. And I think we as adults need to try to apply that. We need to, just like you're saying, take children out into other societies and ourselves even, and let us see what the other people experience, because you can have a more a different perspective once you see it. Until you see it, you really don't have any idea. So I'm gonna shut up.
No, it's very true. I appreciate that so much. Kind of in closing, we've got 4 or 5 minutes left on this. I don't know if anyone has any other big takeaways. I think that the epilogue, you know, that last paragraph, in a world without caste, being male or female, light or dark, immigrant or native born, would have no bearing on what anyone was perceived as being capable of. And I think we let, you know, we let this unconscious structure sometimes dictate just by looking at someone what we think that they can do and what we think they can accomplish. And ultimately, hopefully, conversations like this will take some of that away. It says a world without caste would set everyone free. And I think that's hopefully the overall goal is, again, gaining that knowledge, gaining that perspective to just automatically assume that whoever is standing in front of you is worthy of standing in front of you, and what can we accomplish together.
If I can interject before we step away, I'm sorry, I was driving, so I couldn't speak earlier. I was extremely impressed with the conversation that we had in the room with quite a few people there at French Lick. We were able to carry on a conversation, give our opinions and views, and everyone kept an open mind and were very receiving of what was said and understanding. I think we need more of that. I think we need more of getting people together to have a calm conversation once we have become aware of this. I am reminded of the fact that is, excuse the expression I'm going to use here, of when we are small children and we know nothing about sex. And then when we get older and we all of a sudden learn about sex, the world looks totally different to us. That is what I feel like we are learning right now as we are moving forward in this discussion with this book. We are seeing things that we were not made aware of before. Unlike going out and trying to talk to everyone about sex, though, I do think we in our profession need to be on the lookout and start educating others that we must make sure that homeownership, appraisals, inspections, work done on homes, everything across the board is done evenly and completely openly and honestly with people, regardless of the circumstances of that particular individual. And that's what we need to do to move forward. If it means separating and having book club discussions across the state, as opposed to just having one central location, that may be something we want to look at.
Thank you for that. That could be an option for sure, expanding the conversation to as many people as we can. Any other, Elizabeth, as our chairperson, or Lester as our fearless leader in book club, do you have, are there any other final wrap-up comments that we have?
Elizabeth, if you don't mind, I'm sorry, Lester.
Yes, I'm sorry, go ahead, Raquel.
No, I was just going to agree with that. I was going to say the same thing that Pam said, which tied into what Lamont talked about. What Mike talked about with the conversations that he and Carter had. It's the ability to have these conversations that is definitely the first step. I would say that when we have these conversations, just as Mike said, you don't agree with everyone, just saying, like, I don't agree with my husband all the time. So you can have these conversations. You could love someone, you could learn from them without agreeing with them all the time. But what I would like to add is when you do have conversations with other people that are expressing their experience and their feelings, we have to be able to just accept it for exactly what they said. We tend to try to, have some pushback on, oh, well, no, you shouldn't have felt that way, or maybe it wasn't this. And we have to trust people for the way that they feel and the way that they experience different things, even if we're in the same room with them. And then we have to say it's okay. Just like when Brenda's going to people's homes when she was doing that and they were living differently. And aside from abuse and those types of things, we have to be in those environments too and understand, that is the word. We, we can't be, we have to, it's okay. I mean, people are different and it's okay, and we can embrace it, and they still bring something to the table, and we still gather something from each of them. So.
Thanks so much there, Raquel. What I was going to say came from the book as well. It says we are all witness and we should never forget. The last minute, it says we look away, but it says the minute that we stop fighting bigotry, suddenly wins. There's no more room for hate. That all men are created equally, and that's directly from the book, and it's talking about the symbols of caste. And so if we really want to do something, again, look at ourselves, but then they gave us those 8 pillars of caste. And if you try to remember those, it's difficult, but you can go through one at a time and say, I'm going to work on something here, here, or here. And for an organization to move, the people have to be willing to move as well. So thank you again for leading a wonderful conversation.
Great job, Jan.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. And I appreciate everyone being open and willing to share. And again, always coming into the conversation with the spirit of grace and intent to learn and understand new and different perspectives. And I think we're moving the ball forward. And I think it's our responsibility now to take the information, take this knowledge that we've shared as a group and put it into the world. It can't just stay on this Zoom call. It can't just stay in that room in French Lick. We have to carry it out into the world and give that love away and see what we can do from here.
Thank you, guys. We will be coming back in September. So I appreciate all your all's support, and we've got a lot of things planned for the convention. So we look forward to seeing you all there, and we will keep you in touch. We'll keep in touch with you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.